Welcome, everybody. Good seeing you. Go ahead and turn to Luke 14. We're going to start there tonight. We are going to move on to another topic tonight. We have 3 class periods left from what I understand. We're going to hopefully spend the last class period going through all of our topics again, just retouching on all of our topics. But the next couple of class periods, I do want to make sure we cover some things we have not yet, I don't think specifically, that I think will be helpful. I believe we gave due time to the responsibilities we have personally and the responsibilities we have toward giving and generosity. I hope that you saw the gravity that Scripture gives that topic. We could have studied it longer. I think you can see there's plenty more we could have looked at, but I hope you'll think more and more about our personal responsibilities, and we will bring that back up again before we're done. Tonight, I'd like to look at Bible teaching related to our personal finances. How do we manage our personal finances? And we're going to I don't know that we'll even get through all the verses there, and there is not a lot of very specific teaching, but there are principles that I think will be helpful to us about how do we deal with our financial management and wise ways of using money personally. And then next time we're going to look at the topic of covetousness. We really haven't spent a lot of time on that, but it is another topic that the Bible refers to frequently. We're going to look at that, and then we'll try to do some review before we're done. So tonight, like I said, we'll start in Luke 14, look at a lot of different passages that just help give us some principles related to our personal finances. Let's bow and pray, and then we'll begin. Our Father in heaven, thank you for blessing us so much. Thank you for giving us so many good things, making our lives easy, putting us in a place where we can have comfort. We are thankful to you more than that, though, for the spiritual blessings that we have in Jesus Christ. We ask that you would help us to be like him, that we would be compassionate, that we would care about those in need, and that we would love others, and that we would be sacrificial. We ask that as we study your word, that you would help us to apply it, that you would help us to be diligent in doing it, and that we would honor you in everything we do. And we pray all these things in Jesus Christ's name, and amen. So I would like to go through a few passages, and I think you'll find that some of the things we're looking at here, we're just trying to draw some principles maybe that are in different contexts. I think that you are aware that there is not a lot of very specific teaching about personal finances in the Bible, handling your personal finances. Why is that, do you think, that there's not a lot of very specific teaching about how do we deal with our bank accounts and how do we deal with money and investments? Why do you think there's not a lot of specific teaching? Do you remember the charts we put up last time about the nature of the economy of the time period these were written? It's different than what things are like now. And so there was teaching, but it's something that we have to take and apply to the specific economy that we live in. I think I would love it if I could go to the Bible and know exactly what to do with my retirement planning. What's the right way of doing retirement planning? I would love if I knew God's ideas on that. But there are some principles that help with that. I would love to know how much I should save, or how do I deal with my job? Do I need to try to get a better salary in order to prepare better security for my family? Those are things that I have to just draw out from some of the principles that are taught here. But I hope that you saw that in the last few class periods that really the principles that are taught here is stop worrying so much about that. God will help. God will help take care of you. But that doesn't mean that there are not day-to-day types of ideas that we need to try to draw from here that will be helpful to us in making wise decisions. So I want to start with some things. In fact, some of these first passages you'll see are only mildly related, but I think they do refer to almost just given principles that we can abide by. So in Luke 14, we have we've parsed out some pieces of this before, but I thought it might be interesting to see the context starting in verse 25. In verse 25 it says, "Now large crowds were going along with him, and he turned and said to them, 'If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father, mother, wife, children, brothers, sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple.'" Stop there for a moment. I think you know where this is headed, but I wanted you to know that this is the context in which these next things come. In fact, we've read verse 28 before in this class multiple times, but it's right after he says, a passage we know well, "Whoever does not, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father, mother, wife, children, brothers and sisters, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple." Now, what's harsh about this statement? What's hard to hear in this statement? What'd you say? The word hate. In our society, and certainly in theirs as well, the word hate is very harsh. Now, we know that there has to be some understanding of why he used this word, since there are other principles in the Bible to say that we should not hate. There is no hate whatsoever in the mind of a Christian. So what does he mean by the word hate here in this context, Barry? Yeah, it means to love less. And so what do we call that? That's a priority. That is, there's a prioritization that says that you have to understand where Jesus falls in this, in your life. And so when he says hate, what he's really saying here is you need to understand the relationship between your responsibility or your relationship with me and these physical things, these things that are on earth. But it really comes down to by comparison. But when we read on, he helps explain that even more, because he says after that, "Carry his own cross and come after me." That is, there is this sacrifice that takes place. There is this prioritization that takes place. And he explains that further starting in verse 28. For he says, "For which one of you, when he wants to build a tower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who are watching it will begin to ridicule him, saying, 'This person began to build and was not able to finish.'" So this is not, the point of this passage is not about planning a construction project. This is not teaching about how we best plan construction projects. But it's almost a given. Of course, when you do something like this, you plan properly. And it is something that, when something is being done that maybe takes planning and costs money, you do the work that it takes to plan properly. But what is he really saying with that passage? Well, how does that relate to the idea of hating your own mother and father and family and self and taking up your cross? Why is that what he says? I'm reminded of the story of Cortez and the idea of arriving at new land, and the ships arrived at the new land. They were ready to set up camp, and what did Cortez say to do to the ships? Do you remember? Burn the ships. Why? Yeah, this is it. We're dedicated to this. We're doing this. And I feel like there's a little bit of that in here. Cortez is maybe the poor man's version of what is being said here. Jesus says, count the cost. Make sure that you know what it takes, what it's going to require of you to be my disciple. He goes on from there. Or what king, when he sets out to meet another king in battle, will not first sit down and consider whether he is strong enough with 10,000 men to face one coming against him with 20,000? Otherwise, while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and requests terms of peace. This is this idea of forsake all for me, like what Barry said. You have to love these things less than me. You have to be willing to make that sacrifice. It is my idea of saying, this is going to require everything of you. This could require everything of you. Does it require for you to leave your mother and father? And does becoming a Christian require you to hate your family? No, but he says, are you prepared for that? Have you considered that it may require that? And are you prepared to do that? And then, of course, we've read verse 33 before. So then, none of you can be my disciple who does not give up all of his possessions. All of these things are perhaps hyperbole, but I think what he's saying is, are you prepared to do it? And the example he gives, I only bring up in the context of personal finances to say, he brings up a given principle, which is you have to make sure that you've thought things through. You have to make sure that you plan properly and that you are ready to take it to completion. And I think it's interesting the context in which he teaches that. We're gonna go quickly through these, so let's just move on to 1 Timothy 5. 1 Timothy 5, and we'll start in verse 1. This is another related teaching that I think just helps teach us some principles about how we deal with our own finances. In verse 1 it says, "Do not sharply rebuke an older man, but rather appeal to him as a father, and to the younger men as brothers." This has nothing to do with what we're studying tonight. I just wanted to read that to you, to any young people in the room, about how to treat me. So, give me some respect. To the older women as mothers, and to the younger women as sisters in all purity. This setup is this relationship, the relationship between people and this respect that people have. But then he brings up specifically widows in verse 3. "Honor widows who are actually widows, but if any widow has children or grandchildren, they must first learn to show proper respect for their own family and to give back compensation to their parents, for this is acceptable in the sight of God. Now she who is actually a widow," I think we often hear a widow indeed, "and has been left alone, has set her hope on God, and she continues in requests and prayers night and day. But she who indulges herself in luxury is dead even while she lives. Give these instructions as well, so that they may be above reproach." We're going to stop there before we really get to our point. So you understand the context here is he's teaching them, respect older men, even ones that are only 50 years old, and older women and mothers, and show respect to each other. But he says specifically the widows, this is how we need to make sure and take care of the widows. And he says you need to honor them. This is even financially, make sure they have the financial support that they need. But some of them don't need that. Some of them don't need the church supporting them. They need their families to support them. And if one of them is living in an opulent life, or it says if a widow is indulging herself in luxury, that changes the relationship, because she's demonstrating perhaps that she's not due that same support. So that's not really what we're looking at tonight, but it leads to this statement in verse 8. "If anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his own household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." This is a verse that I think that we all know, and we know that it's in there somewhere, but I want you to know where it sits. That it is in this discussion of how we relate to others in the church, how we take care of people who need it, how we take care of widows who maybe are helpless. But he says, he establishes this principle, and we're going to see this over and over. And this may be the most clear principle in the Bible about personal finances. It is, if anyone does not provide for his own, especially for those of his own household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. This basic principle we see here, right here in 1 Timothy, is you have a responsibility to work and provide for your own. You do what is necessary to take care of your own family and household. Now, we understand that there are people who are trying but incapable. We understand that there are people who fall into financial distress that no fault of their own. We know that there are people that fall into financial distress because of mistakes that they regret. But that never takes away a person's responsibility to provide for their own to the best of their ability. And he says, how does he refer to a person that is not providing for their own household? It says, they have denied the faith and are worse than an unbeliever. There is a direct relationship between a person who is not working, not doing what they can to provide for their family, and a person who is faithless. Those two things relate. there are not that many statements in the New Testament that are as harsh as this. And a lot of them relate to money. And in this case, it says, just like we take care of the widows, and we make sure we're taking care of those who are indeed needy, and we're respecting the people that that of age, everyone take care of their family. Everyone take care of their household to the greatest of their ability. Work hard and take care of that. I'm going to keep moving just for sake of time. Just turn a page over. It may be on the same page, 1 Timothy 6. We're going to touch on this one. We've read it about 5 times in this class already, but I wanted you to know this is really in that same train of thought. 1 Timothy 6:6, but godliness actually is a means of great gain when accompanied by contentment. For we have brought nothing into the world, so we cannot take anything out of it either. If we have food and covering, with these we shall be content. But those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and many foolish and harmless desires will plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil. And some, by longing for it, have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. You see this connection again between the loss of faith and this ungodly attachment to money. Providing for a family and wanting to be rich are not the same thing. In fact, wanting to provide for your family in an opulent way is not what this is teaching. It teaches providing the basic needs for your family, and that you have established a principle in your family of contentment. This says we've brought nothing into the world. We can't bring anything out of it either. If we have food and covering, we'll be content with these things. So I wanted to mention that one again, just as a principle, that we work hard, we provide for our family, but we have to establish a family that is content, that is not requiring opulence, that is not requiring great creature comforts, that is not requiring fancy. And I know that seems like a really simple thing, but I'll admit personally, there are so many things that I consider in my life absolute dead-level requirements for living that don't even come close. The things that, if I don't have them, I consider to be almost homelessness, are ridiculous. And I know I'm not the only one like that. I told you the story last week about the great tragedies my family has befallen in the car category. And luckily, we had cars that were lost and no injuries. But what do you think I did over the last few days? I went car shopping. Is it because that my family could not survive without my sons having transportation? No. I don't want to have to drive them places. That's the whole thing. I'll work really hard to make sure I don't have to carpool my kids around. Could we survive with 0 cars? Yes. In fact, I made a joke to somebody the other day. When this all was going down, I was talking about getting my boys bus passes. And I made that joke, and everybody laughed, and I kind of thought, that's where I am in my life. Because in this city, there are thousands of people who survive riding the bus. And they are working hard, living perfectly reasonable lives, and I almost consider it a joke that I would ever ride the bus. But that is a demonstration to me of a lack of contentment on my part, that I don't want to be discomforted by the situation. So I wanted to bring that up in this context as well. Turn to 2 Thessalonians 3. Yes, sir, please.
I think that as a person grows spiritually, those things become less important to me. It seems to be my life. My house burned down, I could care less. If you have trust in God, that's all that's important to you.
I think it's an important point he makes. If you couldn't hear him, that the stronger your faith gets, the stronger you focus on spiritual things, the less important those things do become. And all these things will be handed unto you. It will be given unto you. It's almost like place the right things first, and those things will diminish. I mean, and it happens, we had car accidents in my family last week. It really did cause all 6 of us in the family to really appreciate how thankful we were that life was spared. And I think we did recognize, all 6 of us realized we couldn't care less about those cars. They were terrible cars anyway, honestly. But it does help that when we focus on spiritual things, we focus on, that was 2 Christian boys in a car accident, and they were not injured, and no one else was injured. And, maybe that we focus on those spiritual things, and it's like, you know what? I couldn't care less about a car smashed in a lot. Let's focus on the most important things. I appreciate you bringing that up, Glenn. 2 Thessalonians 3 and verse 6. This is a little bit of a long reading, but I think you'll find there's a lot of really interesting things in here related to our topic. 2 Thessalonians 3 and verse 6. Now we command you, brothers and sisters, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you keep away from every brother or sister who leads a disorderly life, and not one in accordance with the tradition which you receive from us. For you yourselves know that you ought to follow our example, because we did not act in an undisciplined way among you, nor did we eat anyone's bread without paying for it. But with labor and hardship we kept working night and day, so that we would not be a burden to any of you. Not because we do not have the right to this, but in order to offer ourselves as a role model for you, so that you would follow our example. Stop there for a moment. Often we read these passages about that we're trying to be careful about brothers and sisters who lead disorderly lives, not in accordance with the tradition, which in this case means the stuff Paul was teaching them, that these inspired men were teaching. And it says, we didn't act in an undisciplined way. Paul and his counterparts were not acting undisciplined. He says, what that means is they were paying for what they could pay for. They were working really hard, and what does it say was the reason they were working very hard? We were working hard so that they would not be a burden to anyone. So this is another piece we haven't talked a lot about in the community of the church, that everyone works to take care of their own. But one of the reasons they're working is because, and in particular in someone who has dedicated their lives as a preacher, someone who has dedicated their lives to God, they want to do what they can to make sure they're not burdening other people if at all possible. That's a principle that they taught, that's a thought they have, is I do not want to be a burden, and to be an example. But then you see in verse 10, for even when we were with you, we used to give you this order, if anyone is not willing to work, then he should not eat either. For we hear that some among you are leading an undisciplined life, doing no work at all, but acting like busybodies. Now we command and exhort such persons in the Lord Jesus Christ to work peacefully and eat their own bread. But as for you, brothers and sisters, do not grow weary of doing good. This principle that is taught here, take care of what you can. Do not live in such a way that burdens others because of your lack of discipline, because of your lack of hard work. And he says, work peacefully and eat your own bread. That's a very simple, but I think powerful principle that I think about. I don't know that I've really thought about that enough. That's my job. My job in my family is to work hard, peacefully, and take care of myself. And one of the reasons is so that I'm never a burden to anyone else in the church. We're going to continue this concept. Let's move on to Romans 13. So I think you see that there's not a lot of detail here. There's not a lot of very specific financial management, but there is encouragement to say, work, and don't make plans that cause you to be a burden to others. Romans 13 talks about one of the most hated topics in America, and you'll see when we get to it. But Romans 13 starts off by saying every person is to be subject to governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God, and they who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves. So this principle brought up at the beginning here that says, be subject to governing authorities. There is no authority except from God. I would hate to think that in our political climate, there are people who think, well, they don't understand Democrats and Republicans, though. They don't understand how bitter the differences are between liberals and conservatives. When they said be subject to governing authorities, I don't know that they knew that there would be a president that we disagreed this much with. I don't think you've studied Roman history if you think that. I think sometimes we believe that the political battles in America are the worst in the history of the world. And it's not even close. Even to other political battles in other countries right now. But when he says be subject to governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, he certainly includes what America is like. But he goes on then in verse 5. And I wanted to read that because it helps us understand what he's going to say here later. In verse 5, therefore it is necessary to be in subjection, not only because of wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. For because of this, also pay taxes. For rulers are servants of God, devoting themselves to this very thing. Pay to all what is due to them. Tax to whom tax is due, custom to who custom, respect to whom respect, honor to whom honor. There's a lot here in just these couple of verses, but he says, you should be in subjection to governments for sake of conscience, meaning you are subjecting yourself to God when you subject yourself to the government. And he says, pay taxes. This is a command in Scripture, the same command as the commands we follow for everything we do. It says, pay taxes. And I think it's even more powerful when he says, pay to all what is due them. When you owe somebody something, you rest assured that you pay them. Now, of course, there are times where you were forgiven a debt. That's perfectly acceptable. That someone might say, you don't owe it to me anymore. But when you take on debt, he says, pay the debt. He says, if you owe tax, pay your taxes. I know that there are people, not necessarily of our particular church, but there are religious people who believe that taxes are illegal. And they refuse to pay taxes, and they've decided that they're their own country. I've heard about people who decide, you know what, I've decided to make my land the country of Snappania. And so I don't have to pay taxes to the United States government because I live in my own country. And they're trying to find ways of avoiding tax. And I read this passage, and I just don't think there's a way of getting around any of this teaching. Pay taxes, prepare to pay taxes. Sometimes when the tax bill comes due, we've spent all our money and we're in trouble. But this says, plan for that, prepare for that. And it is because it's for good. It is for God. Then in verse 8 it says, owe nothing to anyone except to love one another, for the one who loves his neighbor has fulfilled the law. Now we should be careful that there's also in Matthew 5 where it is taught, give to those who ask from you, and do not reject those who want to what? Borrow. There is teaching specifically in Matthew 5 by Jesus that says if someone wants to borrow, let them borrow. There is borrowing and there is returning throughout the Bible. But when he talks in verse 8, he says, do not stay in debt to people that you owe things to. Find a way to pay them. The same topic in Matthew, we won't turn to Matthew 22 for sake of time, but Matthew 22, you know the story. They came to Jesus to try to catch him in his words about paying taxes, and he said, what was his statement? I bet we can do it from memory. Yeah. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, but render unto God what is God's. He says, this coin, he shows them the coin. It's pictures on it. Give Caesar his money. Pay taxes. Just not play this game. I hate to be trying to perform Jesus here, but I feel like he was pretty sharp. And he was like, don't play this game with me. This is Caesar, give Caesar his money. But make sure also you give God what is God's. Now, I'd like to move over for a few minutes and I want to kind of shotgun through some verses in the Old Testament that give us some specific ideas about money management. Ecclesiastes 11 is where we'll start. Actually, we don't have time to get into that. Read Ecclesiastes 11 sometime. It's pretty interesting. We don't have time for it. But I'll just say Ecclesiastes 11, verses 1 through 6, talks about making sure that you make wise decisions with your money. Diversify. Don't put all your money into crazy schemes. Make sure you plan for the future. Make sure you plan for a rainy day. Make sure you put money aside so that if you need them, if you need money, you have it. But I would say also it says, spend money to do good things. And so I'll just point you to that, and I think you find it interesting. But one of the things I would like to say about that is that the Bible teaches us to be smart enough not to try to survive on get-rich-quick schemes. You've heard the statement, if it's too good to be true, what is it? What's the following? It probably isn't. I see people that are duped by schemes and scams all the time. It's part of my business. And God tells us to be very careful about that and not try to become rich or to make money scheming. That leads us into the Proverbs, where it tells us how we should do it. Proverbs 6 we'll touch on, go to the ant, you lazy one, observe the ways and be wise, which having no chief, officer or ruler, prepares its food in the summer and gathers its provision in the harvest. This idea of preparing for the times when you need it, saving carefully, working hard when you can, and the lazy person ends up getting caught unprepared. Proverbs 10, let's spend a couple minutes there in Proverbs 10. Proverbs 10, where the next couple we're going to look at, Proverbs 10 and 13, are both Solomon teaching. And we know, I guess you could make an argument, the wisest man in the history of the world is Solomon, teaching us how to handle these situations. In Proverbs 10 and verse 1, a wise son makes a father glad, but a foolish son is a grief to his mother. Ill-gotten gains do not benefit, but righteousness rescues from death. Verse 4 says, poor is one who works with a lazy hand, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. He who gathers in summer is a son who acts wisely, but he who sleeps in harvest is a son who acts shamefully. There is clear teaching here about working hard, making plans for when times are not as good. Not throwing your money away on things that maybe are not important because you think you'll just have more money coming later, or times will always be this good, or bad things aren't going to happen. Work hard to prepare to be secure and safe long term. But if you go back to verse 2, he talks about ill-gotten gains do not benefit, but righteousness rescues from death. I think this speaks back to that idea of trying to find those get-rich-quick schemes, trying to find those things that maybe are too good to be true, and thinking, I'll put my money into this, and then I won't have to work so hard. Instead of working hard for the money, maybe I can just try this thing, and maybe I'll get money anyway. Solomon says that doesn't work. In fact, Proverbs 13 and I don't know what verse, I didn't write it down, but some verse in Proverbs 13 says, wealth obtained from nothing or wealth obtained dishonestly dwindles, but one who gathers by labor increases it. These are the verses, just so you know, that were used about gambling and about people teaching. There's nothing really in the Bible about gambling, but there are things like this that are taught that show that obtaining money through gambling doesn't work. It's an ungodly way to obtain money. Now, we should be very careful. I've heard people take that to the point where they say investing money in anything is gambling and therefore is sinful. And I can't make that decision for you. I'll just tell you that I don't see that principle that wise investing is the same as ill-gotten gain. Now, speculating, I think there's a difference between investing in long-term index funds that are safe, good, long-term investments as opposed to day trading. What's day trading? Anybody here tell me? You won't prove you do it by telling me what it is. What's day trading? Yeah, you're trying to find a thing you can watch the market and find this golden egg here, and I'm going to put a bunch of money in that right now, and then maybe that night I'm a millionaire. Yes, most likely that night you lose it all. There are people who, instead of making wise investments with their money, trying to gain it over time, by the way, also people who decide to start investing when it's already too late. It's often day traders trying to make money. I made fun of Bitcoin earlier, and I do own a little bit, but I've seen people who try to invest a bunch of money in Bitcoin because they've seen people who, there was one called Dogecoin. You ever heard about Dogecoin? Who invented Dogecoin? I see the young people laughing at this because they know exactly what I'm talking about. And they won't tell me that it was Elon Musk who talked about Dogecoin. It was some guys who started it as a joke. It had a picture of a dumb-looking dog on it. And Elon Musk mentioned it and invested in it for his child. And Dogecoin skyrocketed in value. And people made all this money just because Elon Musk kind of talked about it. And there are people that think that's a great investment strategy. But that's speculation. That's this idea of day trading, this idea of trying to make money without doing the work and taking the time. So I can't tell you that it's wrong to do, I'm not an investment expert. I can't tell you that Bitcoin or Dogecoin or whatever is a bad idea. I can tell you that the idea, though, that God gives us is that making money by not working is not the way to do it, and that it is likely to come to ruin. But these two things we saw Solomon say, which is if you're trying to obtain wealth from dishonesty, that is, he also seems to say if you are swindling people for your money, then that money is worthless. It dwindles. But one who gathers by labor increases it over time. I told y'all, I made a joke early on in this class where I said, I've got a bunch of books to learn how to invest, and they all said the exact same thing. As soon as you get your first job, start investing 25% of your income in long-term index funds, and then when you're 70, you will have $1 billion. And I read that when I was 50. And I think, yes, of course, that is the right way to invest. Have discipline and sound judgment and start it when you're young and all that. But it's so rare. It's so rare that people actually are that disciplined, and then they try to get rich quick later. So to the young people here, I will tell you, do small things now and be disciplined, and I think you'll find God makes it work. We don't have much time left, but I do want to look at Proverbs 31. As I studied for this, I was struck by the fact that the most specific teaching about money management was not taught to men. I've read to you most of what the Bible says. Proverbs 24 has some teaching as well about preparing and working hard. Very clear teaching. But the most specific teaching was in the teaching in Proverbs 31 about the virtuous wife and how she dealt with her household assets. In verse 10, an excellent wife, who can find her? For her worth is far above jewels. The heart of her husband trusts her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. She looks for wool and linen and works with her hands in delight. She is like merchant ships. She brings her food from afar, and she rises while it is still night. She gives food to her household and portions to her attendants. She considers a field and buys it. From her earnings, she plants a vineyard. This is as specific a teaching we have as of a picture of a person making sound judgments, working hard, taking assets and using them properly. And it is taught to us to show what this great wife is doing. What is the reputation of a wife I would say, an undeserved reputation of a wife regarding money. When we talk about what wives do with money, is it usually that she's the shrewdest investor in the family? No. What's that? Yeah. And like I said, I believe it is an undeserved stereotype, but often what we say is, oh, the guy's making the money and the wife's just out, spending it on fancy things. That is such I think, an improper stereotype. This picture here of a worthy woman is that she is taking those household assets and she is pleasing her husband by making extremely good business decisions. The picture in the Bible is not of the men who are the business-minded ones and the women who are just off spending money. That is not the picture of a family in the Bible. It is a man who is working and a wife who is working. And when he is bringing in things, she is using them shrewdly. She is making good decisions. She is even making good business decisions, investing, finding good uses of that, while at the same time just providing the basic needs of her family. But certainly these are things that don't just apply to a worthy wife. I think these are things that just tell us people who use their assets wisely, make good decisions, work hard with them. You can see that the picture is that she's also, at the beginning, it says she's looking for wool and linen. You can see that she's trying to make purchases to benefit her family in a way that helps them. She finds a field and buys it and plants a vineyard. She's trying to provide for the family with those things. I just think it's so helpful for us to see that the idea of a worthy wife is that she makes good business decisions, and that she is helping, both the husband and the wife are helping to make long-term sound business decisions. It is about planning. It is about seeing the future. It is about making very sure that you're using these things properly. When I was young, when I was in my 20s, I found myself, when I was buying things or spending money, making investments, working on things, I didn't take as much care or as much time or as much thought. The older I get, the more I measure twice and cut once. Literally sometimes. This idea of considering, planning, working hard, providing, and realizing that it is a long game. Realizing that our responsibility has to start now, and that we are working hard now to plan for a long future. Our time is up. I appreciate your time. We'll talk a little bit more about this next time, but I hope you see these are the types of things we're taught. We're not going to learn what stocks to pick. We're not going to learn what job to pick necessarily, or exactly how it is that we handle our bank accounts. But these basic ideas of work hard, feed your family, make good, wise business decisions, see it as a long game, are certainly godly ideas that we need to apply. Thank you very much for your input tonight. We'll see you on Wednesday.